There has only ever been one mortal whose skill at playing the lyre compared with the skill of the golden god Apollo. That mortal's name was Orpheus. On his mother's side, he was more than mortal. He was the song of one of the Muses and a Thracian prince. His mother gave him the gift of music. Thrace, full of the most musical people and where he grew up, fostered that gift. Orpheus had no rival there or anywhere except for the gods. When he played, everything animate and inanimate followed him. He moved the hillsides of the mountains and turned the courses of the rivers. The birds would swoop down from the heavens and sit on the branches above his head. Animals of the fields would gather round him, their heads cocked to one side in awe. There was no limit to his power when he played and sang. No one and nothing could resist him. Orpheus had fallen in love with a woman called Eurydice, and they were to wed. There was a magnificent wedding, but all through the wedding ceremony, the candles and lamps in the temple gave off an oily black smoke so that the guests coughed and choked. Even the priests had to wipe tears from their eyes. They looked at one another and shook their heads.
This is a terrible omen. Such things should never happen at a wedding.
And the priests were right to be worried. The very next morning, Eurydice woke up early. She climbed out of the bed where Orpheus was still in deep sleep, carefully pulled on her clothes, and went out walking. The dawn was breaking beams of brilliant light across her face. A snake that was coiled up on a rock nearby woke up. It slid through the grass just as Eurydice was walking barefoot across the meadow. Their paths crossed, and without hesitation, it sunk its fangs into her ankle. Its poison coursed through her veins. Orpheus woke up alone in his bed and wondered where his new bride had gone off to. So he went in search of her. Coming upon the field, she was lying there. But when Orpheus touched her, her body was dead and cold. He lifted her in his arms and carried her home, his face wet with tears. Orpheus could not endure his grief. It was overwhelming. When the funeral was finished, when the pyre had burned and the heat of the fire's heart had consumed the house of bone, Orpheus picked up his lyre and set off in a great journey. He determined to go down to the world of death and bring Eurydice back. He traveled over land and sea until he came to a dark cave. He cautiously made his way through the tunnels that wound to the left and swung to the right. He delved into darkness. At last he came to the edge of an oily black river, the river of forgetfulness. On the far side of it he could see the shadowy hills of the country he was seeking. He was looking across to the land of the dead. Orpheus stared over the water with only the thought of Eurydice in his mind. Suddenly, there came the sound of a growling, then harsh barking. Out of the shadows, the great three-headed dog Cerberus, who guards the riverbank, leapt at Orpheus, his lips curled back from his teeth. Orpheus lifted his lyre to his shoulder and began to play. And such was the beauty of his music that the monstrous dog became no more than a mere pup. The beauty of the music floated across the water and reached the ears of Charon, the ferryman. He pulled his boat towards the harmonious sound. Orpheus never stopped playing his lyre, even while gazing upon the ominous hooded figure. He stepped from the riverbank into the boat, and the ancient ferryman asked no fee in exchange. Orpheus continued to play as Charon pushed away from the land and pulled his boat across the river. When they reached the far side, Orpheus, still playing, jumped from the boat and walked into the shadows. Soon there was a whispering around him, a rustling. a shuffling, like the sound of the wind blowing through dead leaves. The dead were gathering. They were following him. They were enchanted by his music. It made them weep for sorrows and laugh for joys that were forgotten, for the dead have lost all memory of their former lives. They're a drifting host of endless, empty, longing whispers. On and on Orpheus walked, surrounded by the dead. Then he saw a palace loom out of the shadows. As he approached it, the dead fell back. He found that he was walking alone. He made his way between the black gates, climbing the steps of black stone, approaching a doorway of black ebony that swung open before him. At the far end of the hall there were 2 thrones. On one sat the King of Terrors, Hades himself, his eyes as deep as open graves, his black beard spread across his belly. Beside Hades sat his wife, the beautiful Persephone. She was like a moon shining in a dark sky, like a mistletoe berry in the depths of winter. Orpheus, still playing his lyre, walked up to the 2 thrones. He stood firmly before the god and goddess. He looked into their faces and began to sing. We mortals are wretched things, and the gods who know no care have woven sorrow into the pattern of our lives. Even the sparrow on the branch, even the wren in the willow knows more of sorrow than the thundering gods, who have never felt the cold hand of death closing around their hearts. But you mighty gods, you have known the sweet pains of love. You have felt Aphrodite's shining shafts. Great Hades, imagine those summer months when Persephone is gone, lasting forever. Imagine, if you can, her pale face crumbling to dust. That is how it is for mortal man. Great Hades, I beg of you, give me back my Eurydice. There was a great silence. Finally, Persephone turned to Hades, her face streaming with silver tears, and Hades turned to his wife. Orpheus's words drew iron tears down Hades' cheek and made hell grant what love did seek. He drew breath and spoke.
Fetch me the 3 fates.
The 3 ancient sisters were brought before him. The first who spins out the thread of a life, the second who measures its length, and the third who cuts it. Hades peered over the sisters, finally landing his gaze on the wrinkled, leathery face of the 3rd sister.
Find the cut thread of Eurydice's life and mend it.
The 3rd sister bowed obediently before the god. Hades turned to Orpheus.
Now go, leave my palace, leave my realm, and she will follow you. But do not look behind you. Do not look over your shoulder until the light of the sun shines full on both of your faces.
Orpheus bowed. He turned on his heel and left the palace. He made his way across the shadowy kingdom until he came to the river's edge. Charon the ferryman was waiting for him, and he climbed into the boat. As he sat down, he felt a tremble, as if someone had climbed in behind him, but he kept his eyes forward on the far shore. When they reached the riverbank, he stepped out of the boat, and behind him he could hear footsteps. Soft footsteps following him. As he journeyed, he could sometimes hear the snap of a twig. Sometimes he thought he could feel Eurydice's breath on the back of his neck. But still, he looked ahead. He made his way through the tunnel of stone. Soon, he would be out of the cave and breathing the fresh air of the living world. Above him the sky would be bright with shining stars. Soon, he thought to himself, soon the dawn will break and the light of the sun will shine on my face. He knew that Eurydice must just be behind him, but he longed unutterably to give one glance to make sure. Almost there, the blackness was turning gray, and he stepped joyfully into the daylight. Elated, he turned to greet his beloved. But it was too soon. She was still in the cavern. He saw her in the dim light. He reached out his arms to clasp her, but she was gone. His arms closed around empty air. In the land of many guests, the third fate cut the thread of Eurydice's life for the second time. This time, there would be no mending it. Orpheus rushed to follow her down, but he was denied entrance. The gods would not consent to his entering of the world of the dead a second time. He was forced to return to Earth alone in his desolation. Wandering through the solitudes of Thrace, he rejected the company of men. He devoted himself to playing his lyre, always playing. And his music was more beautiful than ever, but woven through with a silver thread of sorrow. And Orpheus never saw Eurydice again. Never. At least, not in this world. There are whispers that when he died, Charon the ferryman was waiting for him. He carried Orpheus over the oily black water, and as he stepped onto the bank at the far side, like all the others, he forgot everything. He joined the drifting, oblivious hosts of the dead, but Persephone had seen him. She remembered him, and she felt pity stirring in her heart. She reached forwards and touched Orpheus's forehead with the tip of her finger. In that moment, his memory returned. Persephone then touched Eurydice's forehead, and she too remembered everything. The two lovers found one another in that shadowy kingdom, and they fell into each other's arms. Even to this day, some say, they walk together, talking and laughing. Sometimes arm in arm. Sometimes Eurydice walks ahead and Orpheus follows. And sometimes Orpheus walks ahead, knowing that he can look over his shoulder and his Eurydice will always be there.